Hi, my name is Marisha Hadavi. I'm a nurse here in Omaha, Nebraska, and I want to present to you today the topic of natural family planning and how to use the Marquette model of natural family planning. So, just a little bit about me. Like I said, my name is Marisha. I'm a nurse here in Omaha, Nebraska. I've been a nurse for about 4.5 years now. I started in neonatal care, um, transitioned to OB-GYN, infertility, and now I work in a primary care, pediatric, women's health office. So kind of get a little bit of everything there, which is really nice. But my true passion in medicine is definitely the maternal fetal world, maternal child. Um, Even before I started school, I knew I wanted to do something in that area, that realm. So um, Marquette and teaching NFP is really right in that arena, and I'm just so excited to share this information with you. All right, so just a kind of an overall of how this presentation or what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to talk about what actually NFP is. A lot of people have heard of it, but probably may not know the ins and outs of everything or what it really means. How it works, how to use NFP, and how effective it is, which is a big one, right? Because this is why you should use it, how effective it is. All right, so NFP is the ability to monitor your fertility. So a woman's body, a woman's natural physiology is designed to have periods of fertility or times when they can get pregnant and times when they can't get pregnant. So without any other use of medications or anything outside of the body that the woman is taking in, her body has a game plan in place. And so NFP is really just taking advantage of that natural functioning and kind of helping you clue in how to use that functioning for your own purposes to plan your family. So, with that being said, knowing these or knowing how to track that is going to be able to help you decide to either avoid a pregnancy or achieve a pregnancy. So, understanding just a little bit about that physiology in a woman's body is always beneficial when we're talking about NFP. So, fertility really begins when an egg starts to ripen. So, just to back up here a little bit, a woman's cycle starts with a period and ends with hormones kind of rising, which we'll talk about later. But essentially, the body kind of deciding is was that egg fertilized? Is a pregnancy taking place? If it's not, okay, then I'm going to start over and another period's going to go. So from period to before the end of that another period or the start of another period is one cycle. So the start of it is with that period, but then we'll talk about specific hormones too, but estrogen is one of the big hormones that's responsible for a lot of things in that female cycle. So when estrogen starts to rise, cervical mucus is actually starts to be produced. And sperm can live in cervical mucus for up to 3 to 5 days, which really makes the tricky part because ovulation itself, so when that egg ruptures, a woman is really only fertile for that 36 hour timeline. The egg only lives for 12 to 24 hours, but one of the hormones that you use to monitor can surge over the course of 24 to 36. So, anywho, in that time frame is really the only time that a woman is fertile. However, if she has intercourse a few days before ovulation and the sperm survives, that egg can still be fertilized. So because of that overlap, that time frame, we really need to have our ducks in a row and identify that whole fertile window to include the lifespan of the sperm too. Anyways, so and then fertility ends the day a ripe egg is released from the ovary, so that ovulation event. All right, and this is just the general structure of a woman's anatomy. So it starts with that cervix and then going into the uterus, and then those tubes are the fallopian tubes. And then the orange things that you see there are ovaries. So when your ovary starts to develop an egg, so the eggs are actually all in the ovary. And then once they rupture or ovulation occurs, they travel down the fallopian tubes. So your body is essentially gearing up for a pregnancy every cycle. So it prepares in case there is an egg that's fertilized. So the ovary starts to produce that egg. The cervix opens, produces mucus that's friendly to sperm and actually help encourage that sperm and help that sperm along. But then the sperm can live for 3 to 5 days, which we talked about on the previous slide, and they can actually swim in this wet mucus so they can move to go and hopefully meet that egg as their intended purpose. So when all of this is happening, that's when you're fertile and you can achieve a pregnancy, essentially. You can get pregnant. But then, like I mentioned on the slide before, the egg only lives for 24 hours, so it's actually kind of a short window, but because that sperm kind of throws a wrench in that plan. So there's a longer timeline that we kind of have to account for and be aware of. All right, and then this is just a close-up of the actual ovary. So over the course of a woman's cycle, really typically only one follicle develops or matures fully and is goes through rupture or ovulation. However, multiple follicles are probably being worked on by other hormones, which we can always talk about later, but this is just kind of showing that maturity or that growth of that one follicle that eventually is going to rupture. And you can see it in the bottom of the screen here. It is finally rupturing. And then kind of the remnant that remains, that remnant is called the corpus luteum, and it is still fairly important because it does produce some hormones after ovulation that again help regulate that whole cycle. And if a pregnancy were to occur, those hormones help sustain that pregnancy. All right, so we've talked about this a little bit, but how NFP works. So it really takes advantage of a woman's natural physiological functioning. So it uses the natural signs of fertility to identify the beginning, peak, and end of fertility. So we talked about cervical mucus a little bit, but here are some other, common signs of fertility or how we can identify those specific timelines. So cervical mucus, again, is controlled by that hormone estrogen, female hormones, so estrogen being included, and then there's a hormone called luteinizing hormone that surges, or really is what triggers ovulation. So that's a big one too. Identifying that can really help hone in on when ovulation is occurring. And then body temperature. So it's I think it's cool, but I'm a nurse. But one of the hormones that's produced after ovulation is called progesterone. So it's produced by that little remnant or that leftover residual cells from that egg that has been ruptured. So that corpus luteum, or that remnant, produces a hormone called progesterone. Progesterone is thermogenic, meaning that it actually increases your body temperature. So when it's higher, so after ovulation and your progesterone is higher, your body temperature rises. So women will track their temperature daily and kind of know what their baseline is. And then once they see like a continuous rise from their baseline temperature, they know that their progesterone's higher, they know that they ovulated, which again is just a really cool way to be more in touch with your body and use what your body is doing naturally. So the fertile phase, however, while all of those things can be very helpful, it varies from cycle to cycle. So for most women, it's not on the same day every cycle, which is what makes it tricky too. And then I also just wanted to note too, these are just common ways to help identify the beginning, peak, and end of fertility. Female hormones is a more objective way, which we'll talk a little bit about how you can test for those. The ultimate gold standard to identify ovulation and really when it specifically is occurring is ultrasound. So it's actually really cool that they can even do that, but they can actually see the egg develop, grow, and rupture on ultrasound. Obviously, women can't do that every cycle. So we take advantage of these other signs. All right, and this just shows the variability in the fertile window, which is why we have to be educated and kind of know how to look for those signs that we talked about. So this is just showing a woman's charting. Her cycle length can vary a few days from cycle to cycle. That's not concerning and it's fairly normal. But you can see how the fertile window is kind of jumping across the screen, right? So just kind of goes to show that we really need to know how to look for those signs so we can identify them. All right, so this slide is talking about your mucus. So again, that hormone estrogen is in charge of producing your mucus, your cervical mucus. So this is just starting with low. So mucus that is there, but it's not really sperm friendly. It's not going to really do a lot for you, not in your fertile window. The start of it, and it's going to develop likely, but this is in a time of peak fertility essentially. So in what is being shown here on this diagram, you obviously see those two fingers. It's called the finger test essentially. So monitoring your mucus, it seems daunting at first, I feel like, but once you get the hang of it, it just becomes second nature. So in general, monitoring your mucus means that every time that you go to the bathroom, after or before you go to bed for the night, after intercourse, after a bowel movement, you're checking that cervical mucus. And there's a few ways to do that. So you can use some like toilet paper to do it, or you can do the finger test yourself. Essentially, the reason that you need to look at it and to get a better idea than just like having it on a tissue in front of you is because you really have to test that stretchability. So the ultimate peak type mucus is has also been compared to like egg whites, if that's at all helpful. So it's really stretchy, incredibly stretchy, and it's clear and it's lubricative, meaning that it's, I feel like most women probably, if they haven't heard of NFP or charting their mucus before, kind of have a general idea of what that feels like. It's wet feeling. But this just kind of shows the different types of mucus that you may see and kind of what that means. So like I said, the low mucus is just kind of gummy and present. It doesn't really stretch a lot. The high, it's getting there. And then the peak is really that clear, stretches a ton, is very sperm friendly. So this is around the time of ovulation. And then those hormones are dropping back down again. So the mucus may still be there, but it's becoming more like the low mucus that you saw initially. All right. And then I kind of talked about this on the previous slide too, but how to observe your mucus. So really it's kind of something that you need to have in the back of your mind all day, which again, I know sounds intimidating at first, but after you get the habit of it, it becomes really second nature. So you want to look every time that you go to the bathroom prior to going to the bathroom. So right in the process before you start, just because it can be skewed after going to the bathroom. You want to check your mucus every day, and then you want to record the most fertile signs. So that's really important because you may see kind of low mucus all day, but then like randomly you'll get a high in there or a peak in there. You're not going to record low, even though that's what you experienced like 5 times. You're going to record that peak or that high because that's the most fertile sign. And sometimes that happens. Every woman is really different. Especially in terms of cervical mucus. So, all right. So that kind of talks about monitoring your mucus. So one of those things that we can monitor to identify the beginning, peak, and end of the fertile window. This is talking about the clear blue fertility monitor. So this measures the female hormones. So another way to identify those time frames in the fertile window. So this is going to measure estrogen, which we talked about, really controls that cervical mucus, and then LH. So again, that's the hormone that surges around the time of ovulation. So the estrogen is really nice because when this monitor detects estrogen in your urine, we'll talk about how that process works here in a second, But when it detects the estrogen in your urine, it's going to give you a certain reading to let you know, essentially. And then when it sees the LH, that's the peak time. So that's kind of the most opportune time or most likely time of ovulation. So if you were wanting to achieve a pregnancy, that's when you would have intercourse. Anyways, so this monitor measures those hormones, and the way that it does so, is you set up the monitor, and we'll talk about that here in a few upcoming slides, but you essentially can dip your urine using a test strip, and then you insert the test strip into the monitor, and then it reads it for you. It's very generic, and there's some slides coming up with pictures to help you kind of picture that. All right, and this just kind of talks about those female hormones again. So that line of high fertility, you can see that blue line that's higher too with it is estrogen. So high fertility is signaled with that rise in estrogen, and then peak fertility, that purple line underneath it, is that luteinizing hormone, or that hormone that's really surges with ovulation. So that is what the clear blue monitor is detecting for you, which is really nice. It's objective readings. You do it at the start of the day. We'll kind of talk about that process too, but that is what it is looking for. All right, so it is a touch screen monitor. There are two monitors or models. There's an older monitor that's a little different, and if there's ever any questions about that, certainly refer to your instructor, but this is kind of in general how it looks. And when you purchase the monitor, when you get it, it does come with a pretty good instruction book that really walks you step by step how to set it up, how to use it, etc. So like I said, the way that the monitor detects those hormones is by using a test strip that's been dipped in your urine. So you want to use your first morning void, or essentially like the most concentrated urine, which is why they do it, or they recommend to do it right away in the morning. So there's two different ways you can do that. You can either hold the test strip, so that's that blue and white stick there. You can use it or dip it in like a cup or of your urine for 15 seconds and just keep a pretty close eye. Some women even use a timer to get that 15 seconds down, or just count to 15. And then when you're done, on the stick, there's like a topper. So you pull off the top of it and then insert it on that white part, or that part that goes in the urine. So you're putting a lid on it, essentially. So no urine ever comes into contact with the monitor. So things are nice and clean there, which is nice. But so you can do the 15-second method, or you can use the 3-second method, which you're using, you're just going into your urine stream, essentially. The one thing that I will say is that the urine stream is a bit more subjective, like things can change, because it's dependent on like the strength of your stream, and I mean, not necessarily the counting, that's pretty fast, but there's just more variability there. So the 15 seconds is nice because you're doing it, you know that it's in there the entire time. There's no worry about that, but that's just my own little 2 cents there. All right, so again, this is how the monitor is going to read your fertility, basically. So low fertility, meaning don't have a chance of achieving a pregnancy, essentially, or it's not detecting that rise in estrogen. High fertility means that it is starting to see a rise in estrogen, so in that fertile window. And then peak fertility, that means it's detecting LH, so that LH surge, that ovulation event. So how to use your monitor, like I said, when you purchase the monitor, it comes with a manual that's very, very helpful. It's very, it walks you through every step from how to set up, how to troubleshoot things, and kind of what to do if X, Y, and Z happens, basically. So each morning after you set up your monitor, the first time that you get it, you'll want to set it up, and it'll ask you certain questions. You'll turn on the monitor every morning to test your level of fertility. You won't test every day. We'll kind of get to that later, but that's kind of the general process. So you'll look at your monitor if it's asking you for a test, and per your Marquette instructions or per your instructor's instructions, you will test. And then you'll do either the 15-second dip or the 3-second in the stream. And then insert the test strip into the monitor, and then it takes about 5 minutes to do a reading. So a lot of women will do it first thing, and then kind of just get ready through the day, brush their teeth, wash their face, all that fun stuff. And then they'll have the results. All right, so this is talking about how to chart your fertility. So even if you use just the monitor, you still want to keep a record of your fertility, just because it is really helpful. The monitor will store information for you, but to have, it doesn't have to be a paper chart, but to have a chart is very helpful. So outside of the hormones, this is how you chart the bleeding, like during your period. Or some women will have spotting towards the end of their cycle, which can be a sign of a lot of things actually, but you still want to chart it and know how to chart it. So anywho, it's 1 through 4, kind of goes from spotting, to heavy bleeding. All right, and then how to chart mucus and those little readings. So they both kind of mean the same thing. If you are using a paper chart or like an electronic chart given to you, which I'll show you an example of here in a second, given to you by your instructor, there's different lines for these. So in L, it's not as big as that. If you're using both like mucus and a monitor, there's 2 separate lines to show. So, but they do both mean the same thing. So H is high in the monitor, high mucus, low L, well, you get the idea. And then it is important to chart eyes on the days of intercourse, because when you go back through and look at that cycle, it's going to be beneficial for a lot of things. All right, and then probably the biggest factor on that chart is check your desire that month. So do you want to achieve a pregnancy or do you want to avoid a pregnancy? And that really gets to get into the nitty-gritty of that spousal conversation, but that's very important, obviously, because it's going to have a plan in place of, no, this is what we decided to do, and so I'm either using that fertile window or I'm avoiding in a fertile window. And then it's also important to draw an arrow from the start of your fertile window to the end of it. And that just signals to your instructor too that you know when your fertile window is, because I mean, charting, it's in some ways it's like learning another language. You didn't necessarily grow up doing this. You've had your cycle. Women's used to kind of these things for a good number of years, but probably haven't always charted like this. So it does take some time to get used to doing. So it's a good double check that you know. And then you can also just quickly look at that chart and kind of know what's going on. All right, so this is an example of that chart that I referenced. And this just shows a woman's first 6 cycles of charting. So for your first 6 cycles, fertility is going to begin on day 6 of your cycle, which is fairly early, we understand. But the reason that we recommend to do so is because we want to be cautious, and we don't know how early that fertile window is going to pop up on us, essentially. So you'll start testing with the monitor or mucus or what have you on day 6, or essentially the fertile window begins on day 6. So, and then you're just going to chart for 6 cycles, and this just kind of shows that. It does show the variability a little bit in the fertile window. And then the one thing I want to point out too, on cycle 4, I know it's kind of small, but what you'll see is there were some lows and then a lot of highs but no peak. So sometimes that can happen, and one of 2 things could be happening. One, that woman didn't ovulate, and that does happen. Anovulatory cycles do happen. If they become more common, that might be a conversation to have with your instructor on kind of next steps or what to do about that. But it could also be that the monitor missed the peak. It doesn't happen often, but it can happen. So what's important about this cycle is that because there was no peak, that whole time is considered fertile, just to be on the safe side of things, just in case there was a missed peak there, or especially if you're trying to avoid a pregnancy and we just miss the peak or miss the ovulation. And then this is the next 6 cycles of charting. So after you've been charting for 6 cycles or 6 months, your fertile window is going to begin on your earliest peak day from the previous 6 cycles minus 6 days. So let's say your earliest peak day in the last 6 cycles was cycle day 14. So minus 6 is cycle day 8, which is why that cycle day 8 starts there. And that changes, obviously. So from month to month, you're going to cut off 1 month. So if you cut off the earliest, then you're just going to go to the next earliest. But that's kind of in general how that looks. And I know we talked about the numbers for charting that through, so that's that first line there. And then the bottom half of the chart is really just those instructions for you again, because it's really nice to have and just kind of as a reminder to you. All right, so we kind of talked about this a little bit. How to achieve a pregnancy. So you want to have intercourse on the high and the peak days. Because again, that's when the estrogen is rising, that's when the LH surge happens, that's when the egg is rupturing or ovulation is occurring. So you can use this either by telling on with your cervical mucus, or with your monitor, or with both. All right, so as you know, probably by now, how to avoid a pregnancy. Don't have sex on those days. You don't want to have sex or any genital contact, really. So no withdrawal, no condoms, nothing, because even with those, with condoms, withdrawal, anything like that, there can still be sperm that are released. So it can still get to the egg, ovulation can still occur. So anytime in that fertile window. All right, so avoiding intercourse. We talked again about this a little bit, but fertility begins on day 6 for your first 6 cycles, and then fertility ends after 3 full days past your last peak day. So, and we'll talk about this here in a second, but one kind of term that helps is you'll think about peak, peak, high, low, low, go. So essentially what happens on your clear blue monitor, if you're going to be using that, is there's going to be 2 peak days, because that LH surge, which is what it's detecting to get that peak reading, can last anywhere from 24 to 36 hours. So there's always going to be 2 peaks recorded. So you're going from that last peak day 3 full days after that. So it's peak, peak, high. There's always going to be a high after that last peak to, again, just account for when that 24, 36 hour range is. And then low, low, go. So that day 4 is when you're in the clear, basically. All right. So now that we've talked about kind of how to use NFP, what that really means, what we're looking for in the cycle, let's talk about why you should use it. So couples that follow the instructions to the T are both on the same page of what they want to do in a cycle, whether it is achieve a pregnancy or avoid a pregnancy. Effectiveness is 98 to 99%. It is very effective. I mean, we're just using what the body is doing naturally. We're just taking advantage of it. Couples that don't always follow the instructions, so either don't fully understand or really aren't on the same page of things, using the monitor only, it's 88 to 92% effective. Mucus only, it's 80 to 84% effective. All right, and this just talks about the CDC in their new definition or their new recommendations for birth control methods, basically. So it's if you go to the CDC on this link, it lists different methods of birth control. So everywhere from sterilization to IUDs to condoms, everything. It does have a blurb about fertility awareness-based methods and natural family planning. And in 2019, finally upped the effectiveness of NFP, which is really nice because for a long time there it was using like more of a calendar method of NFP, or including like withdrawal as a method of NFP, which just isn't true. Although there can be some calendar calculations that you use to enhance and strengthen your use of NFP, which can be very helpful. But certainly like withdrawal or really old kind of outdated calendar-based methods shouldn't be grouped with kind of the science that we're taking advantage now and that we're aware of. All right, so just kind of reiterating what I talked about. So NFP is 98% effective when you have good observations. So when you're checking or testing your urine when you're supposed to be, when you're monitoring that mucus every time you go to the bathroom, every day before bed, all of that good stuff. Good charting, so recording it, you remember. That may sound silly, but man, life gets in the way. Sometimes you don't always get it down or remember at the end of the day what happened. You're using it every day. And that is a really big kicker too, because especially if you miss like the peaking, like let's say you forgot to test, but you're kind of where you think you are in the fertile window, maybe you miss the peak, that's pretty significant. Supporting each other, that's huge. NFP can be challenging. A lot of responsibility just falls on the woman naturally because it's her body that you're kind of tapping into and learning more about. But it takes support on both sides of the aisle there. And then loving cooperation. So just like I said, especially using NFP to avoid a pregnancy, you're having to abstain in that fertile window, which I mean has its own sets of caveats, obviously, and it really does require a strong motivation and a strong marital bond to get through those abstinence times each month. All right, so benefits of using NFP. You know your fertility. In the medical community and in other communities, they're really calling a woman's like menstrual cycle, like the lost vital sign. You're really tapping in, you know what's going on with your body. And especially as a nurse, it's so cool to me because women will bring in their chart, not for necessarily fertility purposes, but because you can look at the chart and know so much about that woman's health just from that chart. So that is so, so important. You say safe and healthy. This is natural. There's no side effects. You're not taking any medications in, so you don't have to worry about that. There's also social and relationship benefits to NFP. Better communication. You have to be on the same page for this to work and for it to not become like a source of contention in your relationship. You do feel closer to your spouse when you're using and you're using it appropriately and you're communicating more. There's better self-control, especially when you're abstaining in that fertile window. And then really it helps with your spirituality. So a lot of people come to NFP for a variety of reasons. Some people are doing it or have started to do it just based on their religion. And that's really their big why, which is huge, but it's going to ultimately strengthen that spiritual, that faith relationship, because that's your motivation, that's your why that brought you here. All right, so nearing the end here, thanks for sitting with me. But so this is just kind of the general instruction, but what's going to be really beneficial is to have follow-ups with your instructor and bring that chart and bring examples, because once you start using it, you're going to naturally come up with questions. The instructor is going to see your chart every month, and it's a good double check. So follow-ups at 1, 3, and 6 months. And then if you have questions in the meantime, definitely contact the instructor. Again, like I said, using NFP is really like learning another language in some ways. So the more and more you do it, the more you practice, the more like an expert or close to expert status you're going to be. But in that process, you're going to have questions, and that's normal. So certainly reach out to your instructor. And then there's just a little blurb. If you are postpartum or perimenopausal, there are specific instructions for that, just because the cycles, if you are having any, do look a little different. So specific instructions for that. But that is the end of the presentation, so certainly let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for sitting through this with me, and I'm just so excited to be able to share this with you, and I hope everybody has a good night.